Good morning, everyone. Dr. Dalton, Professor Law, Mr. Victor Jan, I can see Dr. Ma, good morning. Welcome you all here today. My name is Michelle. It's my pleasure on behalf of Center for Information Technology and Education from our university to welcome you here. We're delighted to have you with us to participate and share in our Research Symposium 2019. Thank you for coming. We are honored to have Dr. Elizabeth Dalton, the research analyst from Moodle, to share with us. May I now invite Mr. Jan, who is the Executive Director of Hong Kong Education City, to outline this section. Mr. Jan, please.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Victor Chen. I'm Executive Director of Hong Kong Education City. Actually, more than 20 years ago, I'm the IT Director of Education University of Hong Kong. More than 20 years ago, I'm not joking. By that time, we started to introduce learning management system into the university more than 20 years ago. And at that time, we have WebCT. Probably very few of you, or some of you still remember WebCT. And we have Blackboard about 20 years ago. So at that time, when we considered an LMS, actually, I'm not looking at any of the functions because we know the function will be modified, will be improved. The most important factor at that time is the data structure. We look at how they structure the data, whether they can do education research. So at that time, actually, use Blackboard. The only reason is the data structure, which can help university to do further research into the data. So time flies. It's almost 20 years now. So this time, I'm really glad to have Elizabeth with us. I'm really very happy and eager to learn from her about the latest development in how we make use of LMS data to improve, to inform, and help us make decisions about many education learning and issues. Elizabeth is a research analyst for Moodle, and she helps Moodle development with research in teaching and learning. And as I mentioned earlier, actually I myself see the data analytics is the most important part to make to help to inform learning and teaching. She holds an MA in Education Media and Technology from Boston University and is a doctoral candidate in education at the University of New Hampshire. She has worked with Moodle LMS as system administrator, instructional designer, instructor, and learner, which means almost everything in Moodle since 2012. So please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Dalton.
This is my very small amount of Chinese. I only speak Mandarin, only Indian. Thank you so much for inviting me to be at this conference. I have met so many wonderful people doing things with Moodle, and this is very exciting for us to reach out to the community who is using Moodle to see how it is used in the field. It makes us feel better about the long hours that we put into developing it when we see how people are doing great things with it. And we also collect input from all of you so that we can improve the product and make it what you need. So let's see. Yes. All right, so I am often asked, what are learning analytics? And people will often assume that I mean reports. Reports are one kind of learning analytic. They are descriptive. The thing with a descriptive report, and we have many of them built into Moodle, is that you need to understand something about the data that you're looking at to be able to turn it into a prediction or to gather an insight. And that's fine. And there are many things that you can do that way that are very useful and helpful. But we wanted to go beyond that. Now the issue is, even if you're creating a report, data is not information. I think everybody here understands this. This is a view of the Moodle log. Everything that happens in Moodle goes into this log. And I'm looking at it, and I even know where it came from. I took this screenshot. I have no idea what I'm looking at. Because that's not useful. What we have to do is process this. So here's an example of a report that I created when I was working as an instructional designer at a university with mostly online, fully online enrollments. more than 70%. So these were adults who had returned to university after working for a while or raising children. They had other obligations, childcare, elder care, jobs, and they wanted to return to university to finish their degree, or maybe to get a graduate degree. And they were struggling. And the teachers, when I'm looking around the room right now, I can see that people are looking at me or looking at the screen or thinking, you can't do that online. It's not just a matter of distance, it's a matter of time. I'm not online at the same time as my students, so I can't just have a video of their face to see if they're doing okay. I need a little bit more insight. I need a way to know, are they engaging? So some people will do counts of logins. Did the student log in? I'll show you some data later about how unhelpful that is. So this is a report that lists, just for my students, their last name, first name, obscured here, of course, and overall, how many edits or how many submissions for feedback they have made to my course. And I made this available to every teacher in every course. So they could pull this up anytime, and they could see all of the edits, the ones that happened before the term started. So who logged in early? And then week 1, 2, 3, 4, we had 12-week terms. And each week, they could look at this and it would be up to date, it would be live. And they could see for the current week, oh look, I have somebody here who has not logged in at all this week, they didn't do anything. Now they did catch up later, but I would not be surprised if this person didn't end up getting a very good grade. The trouble is, I need to know as the instructor what I had due this week. Did I have something for the students to do, to submit this week? Otherwise, I'm going to see zeros down that whole week, and it tells me nothing. So course design is very, very important. It's important for being able to gather enough data to help the students, but as we're going to see, it's also very important for helping the students actually complete. More often, they have a chance to interact and do something cognitively with the material and submit something and get feedback, whether it's automated feedback or better, personal feedback, the more likely they are to complete the course. Well, then the deans asked me, what about the teachers? Are they logging in every day? I said, okay, well, sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, right? So, do we have that expression here? So here's a list of all the teachers in a particular department and how many times they logged in before the term and actually made a change. Not just logged in, but made a change. And that includes replying to a student post or grading an assignment and so forth. Now this is week 3, and as you can see, the rest of the weeks haven't happened yet. Well, that's not too bad. The teachers felt a little bit nervous about this, but I pointed out that they had the same report for their students, and they allowed as how it was only fair. Eventually, I made a one-line report for the students so that they could see their own data and see how they were doing. Well, maybe you don't like numbers. So a good friend of mine in Israel made a modified version of my report. Now this one reads the other way because Israel is a right-to-left language. And he used a font awesome icon and made the size based on the number of edits. So now you have a quick, at a glance, who's doing the most activity in the course. And you're sitting there thinking, how can I get this in my Moodle? I'll get to that in just a moment. That's still very descriptive, and I wanted to try to gather a little more insight, but when we make insights, we make assumptions. So here was my assumption. In a given week, if a student participates by posting to a forum, or replying to a forum, or getting a reply from a forum, submitting an assignment, or sending a message. In other words, if the student reaches out, they get a yes. And then if the instructor has contacted the student, they have replied to a forum post, they've graded an assignment, they've sent a message, they get a yes. You have all of your students here, and if you click their name, it will take you straight to the screen to send a message to that student. And I made this for myself. I was teaching 2 sections of statistics and having a very hard time keeping up with everybody. And I made this to make sure that I had reached out to every student every week, especially if they hadn't submitted anything. Okay, this is getting us closer. But as we can see, I had to make assumptions. And that means we have to talk about learning theory. We have to talk about pedagogy and curriculum priority, because these assumptions were good for my students at my institution. They may or may not be good for your students, depending on whether you have an activity every week and you have an instructor-to-student ratio such that you can be expected to reach out to every student every week. If you want to have these kinds of reports, there is a plugin in Moodle called Configurable Reports. I will make these slides completely available to all of you. I'll give the link to Nancy to distribute however she sees fit. So you will have access to all of these, but you are welcome to take pictures of whatever you want. Just so you know, you'll have the slides too.
We'll just simply put it onto the conference website.
So the slides will go to the conference website. You'll be able to get a copy of them from there. So this is a free plugin developed by one of our full-time Moodle employees in his spare time. Very, very popular. And not only can you download the plugin and read the documentation, but there is a page of contributed reports that others have created, and they've posted the code. So the code is in SQL. There's also a web-based interface, and you can just pick a couple of columns from a list and generate a very quick report that way. It can do pie charts, bar charts, and line charts. So it has some limited charting capabilities, and you can also use it to export data. So if you have a regular data processing task, and you want to be able to just get an export of that data, you can construct a report in Configurable Reports, and then use the XLS or CSV or ODT download, and just get that data already processed to do whatever it was that you were going to do with it, which really saves a lot of time. But even so, now we have a report, and the instructor needs to remember to look at it. And we all mean well. I've been an instructor. I mean to look at my report every day. But maybe it would be good if I actually got a notification if the student was at risk. Now we are really talking about assumptions. We're going to have to decide what should trigger this notification and who should get it. And that's the nature of predictive learning analytics, where we go beyond simply displaying a report and asking the instructor to remember to check it and to interpret it, and we try to make predictions to remind the instructor of things that are important that we think are happening. Could be about the student, could be about the course design, anything that is stored completely in Moodle, or that we can get the data into Moodle, we can use as an indicator and make predictions. Why do we do this? If you've ever seen one of the presentations by Martin Duguimas, who is our founder and CEO, he's very keen that we're contributing to educational quality in the world. Not just that we're making a piece of software, but that we're helping people to create better courses, to connect with more students, to measure the quality of those courses, and we specifically have as a goal to help you do educational research. That is one of our goals as a company. So I was so pleased to hear you say that this morning, and Martin will be pleased too. Question is, what is quality education? So up until this point, I've gradually talked about reports that are very generic, reports that are a little more specific, and every time we make the report more specific or add some insight or some intelligence to it, we're making assumptions. And that's okay, but we should know what those assumptions are. That's what I'm going to walk you through a little bit today, and then I'll show you the tool and all the cool things that you can do. But I want to take a moment for you to think about what is education? Why are we doing this? Is there some change that we want to see in our students, and if so, what kind? And there's a scholar named Michael Shiro, who is at the Boston College, and that's a Jesuit school. And he has this very interesting way of breaking up types of learning or curriculum priorities according to two axes. So, are we measuring learning by an objective reality? There's some standard, and we are measuring the student against this standard, and we believe that there is a standard. Or, are we engaged in education for subjective purposes of growth, where we can only measure compared to other things by the learner, compared to the learner's previous history, their previous capability, and their current capability? So that's one axis. Then the other axis is, where does knowledge come from and what are we using it for? In some cases, the source of the knowledge is the most important. It is tradition, or it is internal from the learner. But the point is, the source is primary. In other kinds of education, the use of the knowledge is primary. We only care because you're going to do something with it. At the end of the day, we want the student to be able to, that's the stuff down here. So we have these four general, now nobody is just one of these. We all mix them together all the time, and in different classes or different contexts, we have different priorities here, and that's good, that's fine. These are all very valid kinds of education. So here's an example that I used in a little workshop that I did with some of Nancy's people the other day. Let's say that I'm going to teach about the environment. There are four different ways that I could approach that. Let's say I'm going to talk about climate change and recycling, reducing the carbon footprint. If I am an academic scholar, if I am teaching my students to prepare them for a career in academic scholarship, then I want them to learn the history of the climate, the mechanisms of ecology. I might want them to do some statistical analysis on temperature data over time. I want them to use the tools of the academic discipline to become scholars in that discipline. If, on the other hand, and let's say I have elementary school students, I want them to develop their own understanding of climate change and the environment, I might start by asking them, what have you noticed about litter in your neighborhood? And I might ask them, go home and talk to your parents and your grandparents and ask them, has the weather been changing over time? I might ask them, I might give them some scenarios. This is what it might look like. Imagine how it would be for you if you lived in a world where the ocean was a little bit higher, or where temperatures were a little bit warmer. What would that be like? So I'm asking them, in this case, to construct their own ideas. And what I care about is, at the end of my unit, do they have more of an idea of how climate change and the environment work than they did before? Have they grown? And I'm not trying to measure them against the standards of an academic scholar. I'm trying to help them grow as individuals. And as far as they get, as long as they made some progress, and it was reasonable progress for them, that's it, that's good enough. We also have a very pragmatic point of view. Let's say I want to run a workshop in my community, teaching people how to recycle as much as possible and maybe compost the rest. So now I'm going to have some very specific instructions on how to identify the materials something is made out of, to know how it can be recycled, where you need to take it. I probably will have some very specific questions. Maybe I'll even have a multiple choice test at the end and show people pictures of plastics with the symbols on them and ask them, you know, which station do you need to take these to, or which bin do they go in? So I have some very specific things that I can measure here, very objective. Will they do it? Will they actually take their recycling to the bin? And that's the goal of this fourth kind of education. If my goal is to encourage my students to become activists, to empower them to go into their communities and try to increase recycling or try to reduce fuel use, then my method of doing this will probably be to get them together, to get them to generate ideas about, you know, what could happen, what could go wrong if we don't address this problem, and to get them to generate ideas about what to do about it. And my goal is to help them become people who can participate in the broader community and help make the world better. Well, I can't measure this with a multiple choice test at the end. I'm probably going to have them make up campaigns and actually go out and try them in the community. And I'm going to end up asking them, how did that go? And if I give them a grade at all, it'll be based on participation and to what extent I feel like they really reached out to their communities and had an effect. But I might ask them to grade themselves, or I might ask them as a team. You know, each team comes up with a campaign. Okay, tell me how you think that campaign went. This grade isn't really for somebody else, it's for them. So these are four very different ways of doing education. They are all valid. They can all be used in public schools. They can all be used in university. But you have to know what you're doing and what your social contract is with your students so that you can measure them, because you do not measure them the same way. And generally speaking, you don't teach them the same way either. So a few things that Moodle can do, depending on what you're trying to do. If you are trying to ensure that the best students will become scholars, first of all, you are accepting the fact that some of them will not. Identifying the best students to become scholars becomes your priority. You're not trying to help every student pass in this model. You're trying to identify and promote the best. This is a valid instructional goal. It may not be your only instructional goal, but if you want to know if you're doing that, then the kinds of things that will become important to you are identifying appropriate scholarly citations, so originality of work, consistent evaluation, so you can have multiple graders perhaps and use a rubric, but it will be a high-level rubric. It won't be, you know, check to make sure there were no spelling errors. It will be, does the argument follow a good logical structure? Are the appropriate thought patterns of the discipline represented, that kind of thing. And you may also, if you use quizzes or exams, you'll probably want some statistics on your quizzes to understand that your quiz items are performing as anticipated. So that's the field of psychometrics. And we have tools in Moodle that can help you do that. So those are some tools that are available to you. Now, if you are an individualist and you are trying to help each student become the best they can be by their own standards and help them become lifelong learners, there are some different tools in Moodle that you might want. One is, this is a third-party plugin that you would have to install in your Moodle system called My Checklist. And this allows the instructor and the student to add things to a checklist in the course and then check them off as they are completed. So this one allows students to say, these are my goals for the course, and check them off at the end. Yes, I met my goals. You can also use badges. You can use the workshop tool, which allows you to have a grade that's based partially on what the student submitted and partially on their ability to assess other students or to assess themselves in line with what the other students have also said. So this is kind of an inter-rater reliability grade. So this is really good if what you're trying to do is help students learn to self-assess. So those are a few tools. Well, perhaps what you're trying to do is that set of competencies that they must achieve to be able to go on to the next level. So we heard yesterday about certain kinds of dental competencies or procedures, clinical practice that have to be achieved in order to go on to the next level. And in that case, we want to have all of the activities or assessments that are in Moodle, even if they're really happening in a clinical setting, but you're going to record the grades in Moodle. We use competencies to track these. Competencies can be part of a learning plan for the student that can cross courses, multiple courses. And then that's where we actually have some models that can help you identify students at risk of dropping out. Well, maybe you want your students to be prepared to go out there and take action. And these are the sustainable goals that the UN is trying to promote. And they involve things like human rights and gender equality. If you give people a multiple choice question about whether they approve of human rights, they will all say yes. And they'll probably even mean it, but that doesn't say that they're going to act to promote human rights or gender equality out in the world. The only way you can tell if they do that is by asking them when they're out in the world. So these are very difficult to assess, and sometimes we're going to assess them by process. We're going to see if they're engaging in a process that we think, for theoretical reasons or because of prior experience, we think if they engage in this kind of a process in our course, they will engage that way out in the community as well. Or we could start actually asking them out in the community or asking for attestations by others out in the community. How are they doing? So when you have affective objectives, you have this kind of thing. Well, here's yet another plugin. This one's called re-engagement. And what this does is, after a certain period of time, based on some prior action in the course, it will email the user. And it will say, here is an activity I'd like you to do. So it could be a journal entry, it could be a little questionnaire, but it asks them later, outside of class. You do have to let them still have access to the class to do this. But with this kind of tool, you can set a time span and say, okay, we have our course, we had something that we hoped you would take on as an ideal of your own and integrate into your life, and in 3 months, we're going to ask you, how's it going? And the answers could be things like, yes, I've really been walking every day. Well, I've been meaning to walk every day, and I'm still working on it. I'm out there twice a week at least. I have barriers. I broke my leg. So there are different reasons that, or this goal isn't important to me anymore, please stop asking. So depending on what we want to accept, those are different kinds of things. And we could make that an anonymous survey if we wanted, and we could just evaluate the course, as opposed to trying to evaluate individual learners, which is, if you don't make it anonymous, people will all say, yes, I'm walking every day. So, well, there will be a strong temptation to do that. In the course, we might want some social network analysis tools. There have been a number of plugins over the past 10 years that have provided this service and then have just dropped off. They don't get maintained. So I'm going to try to get this into our next release of Moodle as a set of indicators and some kind of chart or graph report. We're discussing what's going to be in 3.8 right now, so there's a chance. I'll do my best. All right. So now you've thought about what kind of education you're trying to do, what's important to you, what you want to measure, how you're going to measure it. Now you want some early notifications about whether those outcomes are going to happen. And that's where the learning analytics comes in. So we create a model by starting with the question, what is the outcome we want to predict or the process we want to detect? Could be positive, could be negative. So students dropping out is a negative outcome. Students getting into graduate school is a positive outcome, we assume. It's the outcome that that program might want. So whatever your outcome is, how are you going to detect it? You're going to need a history. You're going to need a lot of previous student activity and measurements about whether the outcome happened. Which may mean loading some data into Moodle in an extra table. It may mean that you're going to have to go back through some prior Moodle courses and manually evaluate some discussion forums and look for indicators. But you have to have some history that detected the outcome or the process. Maybe the process you're looking for is collaboration. You want to know when collaboration is happening in a discussion forum. Well, you're going to have to go through and manually code some discussion forums to say, yes, these were good and collaborative, and no, these people just ignored each other. What clues do we think might help us predict that outcome or process? So we don't have to know from a theoretical point of view exactly what will help us predict the outcome or what the weighting should be, what should be most important. The analytic system is going to do that work for us. But we do need to identify as many indicators as we can think of that could help predict. And these could be things like submitting work for feedback, logging in every day, spending a certain amount of time. If you're in an academic model, more time indicates deeper thought. If you're in a pragmatic model, more time indicates not very efficient training. So it could be either way. It could be a positive indicator or it could be a negative indicator, depending on what kind of outcome you're looking for. All right, so we have some indicators, some independent variables. We have our dependent variable. Who should be notified? So what do we do if the process or outcome is very likely or very unlikely? Who should be notified? What kind of notification should be sent? And then we want to go beyond just notification. So we should provide some links to actions. So if we send a notification to a teacher, say, your student is at risk of dropping out of this course, we want to provide some links right there that say, send a message to the student, review the student's activity, or even just acknowledge, I know that. Or, not useful, because I don't believe it's true. We need to track how well the system is working. So, for those of you in the audience who are into this sort of thing, this is one of the kinds of tools that we use behind the scenes. You do not need to know about this. But this is a diagram of a feed-forward neural network. So we have two back-end engines that we can use, PHP and Python. In PHP, we have a logistic regression model that can predict a binary outcome. And in the feed-forward neural network, we are still using a binary prediction, but it's actually using a hidden layer with some latent variables in here. So it's somewhat like factor analysis. We don't know what those hidden features are, so it's a little bit like exploratory factor analysis, but you never see the factors. You can, however, get to them in the database if you want to look. If you want to know more about this, see me afterwards. I have more information than anyone here probably wants. But it's not the focus of what we're doing here. If you want to design a system, even if you're not a programmer and you want to write it up well enough that a programmer would be able to develop it for you, then you need to have a list of the indicators that you're thinking of, the kind of target you're going to predict, what your cutoff level is, what kind of notification, what kind of actions. So these are reusable PHP classes. The API is completely open. We do not do any black box learning analytics at Moodle. We don't have any secret algorithms. It's all open so that you can see it. And when you're describing a new model that you want to create, you'll have to sort of describe the context. So the example that we're using is in a course, so that's my Y, each enrollment in that course, I'm going to make a prediction about them, right? Will they complete or not? But you could do this in different ways. And our API supports many different kinds of contexts. So you could say, in each category, which of my courses are likely to be most engaging? Do I have courses that are sort of scanty and a lot of students are likely to not complete because the course isn't very engaging? for each student, which of the courses are they likely to do well in, which could lead you to a recommendation system or a remediation system. In my cohort, which of my students are likely to complete their learning plans on time, graduate on time. So these are different contexts and samples within the context. And our system will let you design these any way you want. All right, so since Moodle 3.4, we've had learning analytics built in. Yay! Most people never turn it on, they don't know what to do with it. Well, I'll at least show you how to turn it on. You do need to be a system administrator. So the first thing is to check the analytics settings. We collect a little bit of information about your site, and if your Moodle site is registered with us, a small amount of information about your site, nothing personal, gets sent to us, and we use that information to understand how people are using Moodle and what we need to work on next. So if you are one of the decision makers, please register your site. It really helps us to understand who out there is using Moodle, how many people they have on their site, and what they need. And within that, we're asking people, what are you mostly doing? You're doing face-to-face, and you're just using Moodle as a file repository for each course? Are you doing some kind of blend? Are you doing fully online courses? You can pick more than one. For the partially online, what percent of the work is expected to be done online? If you are doing a hybrid course and 15% of the work is online, it's going to be hard for us to make predictions for you. And we should discount those predictions based on how much of the work is available online. So in the future, we're going to be using this kind of thing at the course level to let you discount the predictions based on how much data you expect to see online for each course. Which institution matches you best? These are the Unesco levels, so we start with early childhood and go all the way to doctoral or equivalent level. Pick all the ones that apply to your site, and eventually you'll be able to tag courses or whole categories with these levels. We don't know yet if those will end up affecting our learning analytics models. We have to collect the data to be able to find out. So here it is. Once you've done that, you can create a new model. And as of 3.7, which just came out in May, you don't have to write PHP code to reuse the pieces that we have and put together a new model. So you can choose from any of the targets that are installed on your system, and additional targets can be installed with plugins without waiting for a new release of Moodle. And then you'll be able to see this more clearly in one of the other slides. You can pick as many indicators as you want to put into the model. You tell us how often you want to run those predictions and how much information you want to include in each prediction. So, for example, I'm using tenths accumulative. If I have a course that runs for 10 weeks, this would run once per week. And it would use all of the data from the beginning of the course to the present time, each time it makes a prediction. Sometimes you only want it to use the most recent batch of data, not all the way from the beginning. So you have choices about this. And then you can choose whether to use PHP, which is the default, or if you have Python installed in your system, we have a back-end engine based on TensorFlow that you can choose to use. You can see a list of all of the models that are on the system. This can be available to a manager, not just an administrator. So you can open this part up a little bit more. And if predictions are available for a given model, you can choose as a manager to take a look at them. And it's one entry per context. Remember we talked about those big orange ovals? So in this model, it's one entry in the menu per course. And you can go and look and see all the predictions for that course. So they're grouped, these predictions. Well, we don't just want the managers to see the predictions, we want the teachers to see the predictions. And when predictions are made, the teacher will automatically get a notification in Moodle whenever they are logged in. And it will identify the course and say, you have students at risk. And if you click on that to view the full notification, you can see the prediction details, which shows us for this particular student, I'm missing a slide. Okay, in between there's a slide that shows all of the predictions, so each of the students who are at risk and some options. And if you click on those students, you can look at the details. And the details show you each of the indicators that are in the model and what their values are. A lot of these are yes or no. And then your options. And again, we have, as the options, actions, for this particular model, we have included these. Send a message to the student. Look at the outline report for this student in this course, which gives you a summary of what the student has been doing. Mark as acknowledged, which takes it off your list. Mark is not useful, which also takes it off your list, but we will be using this as a way of evaluating models in the future. So if we have a model that makes predictions, and they seem to be consistent predictions, but the instructors are all saying not useful, well, we have a problem. Maybe it's in the wording of the notification, maybe it's in the accuracy, but we need to follow through on this kind of system and see how well it's working for people. It's not enough to just throw the predictions out there. So the particular model that we have supplied, how am I doing on time? Okay, I'm going to kind of spin through these slides very quickly. If you have an interest in this, talk to me later. I'm happy to go over this in detail. We built our original students at risk of dropping out based on this particular educational theory, which is a sort of a combination academic and pragmatic kind of model. It's got a little bit of all of them in it, but it really does look at, we want as many students as possible to complete the course. We assume that that's a good thing. It's been validated in a number of different ways, and the factors in the model do predict learner persistence and learner satisfaction. I have a full bibliography available if you're interested. And we've started with just this first model, but there are other kinds of models that we could have worked on that would build off of this theory. One of the big issues that we came into was people use different tools in Moodle to do similar things. So this gets at the issue of learning patterns to a certain extent and design. I want my students to submit a photograph. Well, I could ask them to submit it to the workshop activity, and they can rate each other's photographs according to some rubric. I could ask them to submit to a forum, and everybody could comment on it. I could use a database and make a gallery. And again, people could comment on it, they could rate them. It shouldn't matter which way I do this. It all counts as activity from the learner. So we looked at the practical inquiry cycle, and I do have the citation down here. And again, bibliography available. And mapped this onto an idea that we were calling cognitive depth. This is a flow chart that every one of the activities and resources in Moodle can be mapped onto. So what we looked at is, how are they all really similar? What should we consider to be basically the same kind of action? So if they view, whether they're viewing a page or a link or the description of the assignment, that's just a view. That's all it is. And then they can submit something. As we go through, they start to go through the cycle. They submit something, they receive a grade, they view the grade, and maybe that makes them think of something. And maybe they're going to come around again. Or maybe they're viewing peer submissions and they're providing the grade, and that provides integration. And maybe again, maybe they'll go through the cycle again, depending on the activity. Not all activities support this much depth, including coming around again. So we also said, we think it matters how many people they interact with. We think it matters how much engagement they have with other learners and with the instructor. So we have this sort of idea of social breadth. This is not fully implemented in Moodle yet, in our model, but this is where we're headed. And what we have right now is just each of the activities in Moodle Core have a potential So a book or a page only has a potential of level 1 social breadth, level 1 cognitive depth, and they gradually go down so that you have the full level of engagement that we offer in Moodle with these down in the corner. We're only doing 2 levels of social breadth currently. We do plan to complete this. I'll let that picture go. Okay. And eventually we'll have a broader model that will really implement all the way out to not just communicating with the course, members of the course, but communicating out in the real world, editing Wikipedia articles, contributing to a public discussion forum about a discipline, getting involved with some community thing. So we have a full range of cognitive depth and social breadth, and we think that if all you have are activities like this, your students may participate, but they probably still won't do very well. We think that if you have more activities down in this direction, and you have configured them so that that level of participation is available to students, then the students who take advantage of that level of interactivity are probably very engaged with your course and are probably going to reach your outcomes. So, I haven't showed this slide in a long time because almost nobody is interested, but I'm at a research symposium, so I did a linear model based on the data from my prior university, and these are the things that really stand out. When a course has a forum every week, an activity that requires some feedback, gives some feedback every week, those are significant towards a student completing the course. Manually graded items, which are very hidden to students, negatively contribute. Faculty edits in the first week. In other words, they haven't finished their course yet. Negatively contribute at a very significant level. In my population, student age was a negative contributor. We had students of all ages, and the younger ones, I hypothesize, are closer to their prior university experience, so they tend to have fewer obligations in life, so I suspect that's the reason here. But the 2 strongest positive indicators, bar none, are the student GPA, their already existing facility in university, and the student submissions for feedback. This is the strongest indicator. It is just as important as their general academic ability. Gender didn't turn out to be significant. There were a number of other things that I tested for that, socioeconomic status, none of it showed up. I took the log of student submissions because they're very non-normal. So, if you like a graph, student submission for feedback and course completion. There's a low level of feedback up to a point, and then you can see, this is a binary regression. Then you can see everybody who kind of gets past this minimum amount of participation is likely to complete the course. That's the strongest evidence I can think of. Well, maybe you care about grades. So I did it that way too. So again, log of edits, log of submissions versus the student grades in the course. Well, maybe you're wondering about GPA, since I said that was the other big predictor. And it actually isn't as tight a correlation, although it's definitely there. But you can still have, people who have quite a low GPA, well, they generally are going to fail the course. But even people who have a pretty good GPA, not all of them contribute, which tells me there's something other than just their academic ability. And we're really interested in this group here because we suspect that they have other factors, some of which we may not be able to do anything about. But maybe we could help them decide not to borrow money to take a course they're not going to complete. It's a big deal in the United States. So we think, based on this, that course designs that have regular opportunities for volleys of extended discourse and have regular opportunities for deep cognitive engagement with feedback are going to help students. We think that instructors who provide regular, prompt, detailed feedback, both publicly and privately, are going to help students. And finally, we think students who actively and regularly participate, not lurking, are more likely to be successful. And if they engage with a wide variety of content and co-participants, we think that that also contributes to their success. That's the data that I have so far suggests that this is true. But what I would like to do is have more of you install a model or generate some data, maybe share some data, and that would be really great. So, what if you want to have some new and different kinds of indicators in your system? For example, Nancy has been showing me this course design tool, which is very, very cool, and it has these learning patterns and Bloom's taxonomy levels and things like that. We don't store that in Moodle, but we could. So here's a system that goes with every activity and resource in Moodle called tags. You do have to turn it on at the system level. And then you could have tags for things like analysis or Socratic dialogue. So this is a Bloom's taxonomy level, this is more of a learning pattern. And those could become indicators in a learning analytics model. So if you want to evaluate a course based on prior courses, the success of prior courses, and say, hey, I think you need a little bit more higher level activities here, this would be how you would store that information. And also, we might want to be able to say, well, you're struggling with this activity. We'd like to refer you to some earlier resources in the course that were for that same competency. You can tag individual activities in Moodle in a course by competency. You need to have a competency structure in there. There are some that you can import, and it's fussy to go through and tag. So what we're working on is a way to integrate Moodle and be able to get that level of detail from a design tool like the one that Nancy's team has been working on, so that you can do it in one place and have it populate through Moodle, and if you make changes, also populate back, which is the tricky part. The most important thing I can offer you to take away: we measure the accuracy of models. We provide you the opportunity, if you set up a model in your system, it will evaluate, it will hold out some test data and some training data, so it will train and then test itself on the test data of your history, and it will give you some measurements of accuracy and variability. But ultimately, the accuracy of the model is not the point. It's necessary but not sufficient. Because when we have these kinds of models, if they don't actually change our outcomes, then we might as well not have done it. We don't want to predict failure and let it happen. So to a certain extent, we want our models to be wrong. And we're starting to build that into the models as well, so that if we predict, we don't have this feature yet, but it's in proposal. If we predict a failure and the student succeeds, we want to ask the instructor or the student, we thought that this person was at risk and they did okay, that's wonderful. Could you tell us if the model helped? Or if we didn't predict that a student was at risk and they failed. We want to follow up, so both false positives and false negatives. We want to follow up and say, we didn't notice that this student is at risk. Is there anything that you can tell us now in retrospect that we should have taken into account? And that's the kind of tool that we want to have in Moodle. We want it to follow the full cycle of learning and give an ongoing opportunity for everybody who's involved in the system to be able to participate in the decision making and offer their input and advice and objections if necessary. If you have any interest in participating, I encourage and beg you to come to moodle.org/analytics. We have a working group. We have a number of online self-paced workshops that you can try. We have discussion forums where you can participate in making decisions about where we go with this tool. We have support for administrators and support for researchers as well as developers. So I really hope as many as possible will log in and participate in our conversations here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth. I'm sure many of you share the same feeling as me that we should have some questions and allow more time for Elizabeth to bring us even deeper into her research and her findings. Maybe we spend a few more minutes for questions. Okay. Any questions from the floor?
Thanks, Elizabeth. This is wonderful. And so for the prediction, we know that the courses are very different from course to course. And also even one course it can be different from each delivery. Then how do we tangle this? What things can be transferable and what things cannot?
That's a very good question. And that's the reason that I put all of this effort into this kind of categorization of the type of activity and the type of learning that's being offered. Because what our data seems to indicate is it doesn't matter so much exactly what you offer to the students, exactly what activity you use, or how you describe it. It matters that you offered an activity and that the learner took advantage of it, from the point of view of what we can predict across courses. What I would like to do is have a way of tracking this course is the same as this course earlier, and bundle those together and make stronger predictions based on that, based on the performance of students in the same course previously, or using the same activity imported from a course previously. That is a complicated problem, but one that I have started to have some ideas about maybe how we can do that. In a MOOC, or in a very large section, where you have the same activity happening, you could make stronger predictions. But we started from knowing that that's not where most of our learners are. So our predictions assume that every course is different. We look for patterns of activity rather than specifics of how the course is designed. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Thank you very much. 2006, we'll be running a project and also the online supported by Moodle. I think at that time, a lot of university teachers, they are very struggling because they spend a lot of time to manage and also to use Moodle. So my question is, for the learning analytic work is also not easy for a teacher. I don't know whether in Moodle you can offer a simple toolkit for teachers if they can use analytic tools. That would be much help.
Thank you. That is a very good question. To a certain extent, that is what we have tried to do. This is the only thing that the teacher sees. They get a notification, and then from there, they can see some prediction details and take an action. They don't have to look at a report or interpret a report. They immediately just get a list of the students who are triggered by this analytics system. All of the management is done in the background by administrators. And the system is trained on your own data in your own server, so hopefully it will be as accurate as possible with your students. So to the extent possible, we have been trying to make a system that would not add burden to the teachers. If you have seen pieces of what I've showed you that you think could be even simpler, I would love to hear your suggestions. And the best place to do that is moodle.org/analytics, so that we can all discuss suggestions together and find good solutions that will work for as many people as possible.
Maybe I should take the liberty to ask another question I'm really interested in. You mentioned about a few terms about like machine learning, neural network, Python, TensorFlow even. So what is the status of Moodle in integrating AI technologies into the analytic? Is it still under research or there are already some findings?
That is a good question. So the question is, where are we with actually integrating machine learning into Moodle? The learning analytics system, as it is right now, uses machine learning. It uses two different technologies. It can work with PHP for the simplest case where somebody doesn't have the ability to set up Python and load Python libraries. Or if you have Python available, it will go on and use additional machine learning features that are available in Python. We have 2 Google Summer of Code students working this year to expand access to different algorithms in the back end. So we are continuing to expand this. We are also looking at some other machine learning kinds of capabilities that we could include in Moodle, such as a conversational interface, like a chat, that the teacher could ask a question and it would direct them to how to do certain things or provide some advice. So we are continuing to incorporate more machine learning features. But at this time, we do have full machine learning in the background of this learning analytics tool.
Okay. Maybe we take the last questions. Anyone has a last question? If not, let's have a great applause for Elizabeth. Thank you very much.
We won't be here all day today. Feel free to grab me if you want to talk about this sort of thing. As you can tell, I get very excited about it. So thank you again.